Chapter 13 of Observations of an Orderly. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marianne Spiegel, Chicago, Illinois. Observations of an Orderly by Ward Muir. Chapter 13. The Station Party. An earnest shopman, not long ago, tried to sell me a pair of marching boots, for use, as he explained, lest their name should have misled me, on the march. Had he said, for use after the war, he might have been more persuasive. When I told him that marching boots were no good for me, it was manifestly difficult for him to conceal his opinion that, if so, I had no business to flaunt the garb of Thomas Atkins. When I added that if he could offer me a pair of running shoes I might entertain the proposition, his look was a reproach to irreverent facetiousness. A grateful country has presented me with one pair of excellent marching boots, but a hospital ward is no place in which to go clumping about in footgear designed to stand hard wear and tear on the high roads, and my army boots, after 2 years, have not yet needed resoling. I wore them, it is true, during my period of service with the chain gang, as the squad of outdoor orderlies engaged in road making was locally called, and I wear them when we have a C.O.'s parade, an occasion on which naught but officially provided attire is allowable. It would take a century of C.O.'s parades, however, to damage boots put on 5 minutes before the event and taken off 5 minutes after, the parade itself necessitating no sturdier pedestrianism than is involved in walking less than 100 yards to the ground, and there standing, stock still, at attention. I do not say that hospital orderlies never go for a march, only that marching bulks relatively so small in our program that any special equipment for the purpose sounds a little ironical. The issue of ward shoes, now, was a real boon. Not that all the pairs with which our unit was suddenly flooded by the authorities proved as silent as they were intended to be. Some of them squeaked, and the peregrinations of the orderly thus afflicted were perhaps more vexatious to the ear of a nervous patient at night than even the clatter of honest hobnails. And the soles were thin. A pair of ward shoes lasted me, on the average, 1 month. If worn only within the ward, they might have lasted longer, though not so very much longer. According to regulations, you were not allowed to wear ward shoes except within the confines of the ward. No doubt it was expected that every time you were sent on an errand outside the ward, you would solemnly take off your ward shoes and put on your marching boots. Then, on the return, take off your marching boots and put on your ward shoes. But life as a nursing orderly is too short for such elaborations of etiquette. It was nothing unusual, when one was working in a ward which lay at a distance of 1/4 of a mile from the hospital's main building, to be sent to the said main building a dozen times in a single morning. This incessant message-bearing had to be done, if not at the double, at any rate at nothing slower than 5 miles per hour in the morning, the busy time. In the afternoon a speed of 4 miles per hour might sometimes be permissible. At all events, running shoes, as I told the shopman, would not have been inappropriate during certain periods of crisis. From time to time our tasks were interrupted by the notes of a bugle, or the shrilling of the sergeant major's whistle, demanding our presence for an intake of new patients. A party of orderlies was wanted to go to the railway station to help remove stretcher cases from the ambulance train. The station lies at a distance of 1 mile from the hospital, and this small pilgrimage, achieved a few score of times, is practically all I know of the veritable employment of marching boots. I regretted when a change of plans diverted the ambulance trains to the central termini for evacuation. The interlude of a station party trip was far from unwelcome. Lined up on the parade ground, we were put in charge of a corporal. "Party! Shun! Right turn! Quick march!" Off we trudged, round the back of the hospital, down the drive, out past the sentry, and away along the road. Presently, "Party! March at ease!" Cigarettes were lit, talking was allowed, and someone would raise a tune. How pleasant it is to march to singing! To march to a drum and fife band must be wonderful, or a brass band. Those joys will never be mine. Almost all the marching I shall have done in the Great War will be summed up in these tiny promenades from the hospital to the railway station, their rhythm sustained by self-raised choruses, none too melodious. Occasionally an officer would be descried on the pavement. Then, "Party! Shun!" Cigarettes were concealed. The song died. "Eyes left! Eyes front. Party, march at ease. The cigarettes reappeared, the song was resumed. Approaching the station. Party, shun. Cigarettes were thrown away. Here in the chief street we must make a smart show. A crowd is gathered round the station gate, attracted by the array of Red Cross vehicles within. Police are keeping back the curious. The way is cleared for our arrival. Left wheel! Now is our one moment of glory. We swing round through the lane of gaping sightseers and tramp in style across the station yard and under the archway, flattering ourselves, perhaps not without justification, that there are spectators whose eyes pursue us with secret envy at the serious import of our task. The station platform, when we reached it, was generally a blank perspective devoid of all living creatures except ourselves. Fate decreed that we should be summoned long before the train was due. I have kicked my heels for many a doleful hour on the platform, and the reflection that they also serve who only stand and wait was chilly comfort if, as frequently happened, we had been hurried off dinnerless. The convoy's arrival always seemed to coincide with dinner time. On our return to the hospital we should find that rations had been kept hot for us, but in the meanwhile an empty stomach was a poor preparation for the strain of carrying stretchers up the stairs from the station platform to the ambulances, and those of us who could produce pennies for automatic machine chocolate gained instant popularity. The longest period of waiting drew to an end at last, however. The platform assumed a livelier air. The station master appeared from his den. Officers of the Army Medical Service and the Red Cross strolled down, and the stairs and platform echoed to the pattering of the feet of hosts of industrious bluebottles, fetching stretchers and blankets. The blue uniformed volunteers who form a portion of the London ambulance column are nicknamed the Bluebottles in allusion to their dress. It is a nickname which, let me say at once, any man might be proud of. I know not whether the history of the Bluebottles has yet been written, but certain it is that their doings have got into newspaper print less often than they deserved. For theirs is a double role which truly merits the country's admiration. While carrying on the commerce of the empire, that vital commerce without which there would be bankruptcy, and no sinews of war, nor indeed any England left to defend, they have vowed themselves also, of their own free will, to the helping of the wounded. Day or night the Bluebottle is liable to be called from his desk or his home by the telephone. Like the Florentine brother of the Misericordia, he must instantly hurry into his uniform and rush to the place appointed. He may be busy or he may be tired, no matter, his vow holds good. Off he goes to the railway station to meet the hospital train and evacuate its stretchers. Myself, I have the deepest respect for the Bluebottles and for their energy in a cause which must often be not only fatiguing, but, from a commercial point of view, extremely inconvenient. It would be absurd to pretend, nevertheless, that the less responsible khaki-wearing R.A.M.C. do not cherish a mild contempt for all Bluebottles. There is no reason for that contempt. It is idiotic, childish, a humiliating exhibition of the silliness of masculine human nature. Members of our station party, who had enlisted but a week back and who knew nothing whatever of their work, would, in a whisper, mock the Bluebottles, although every Bluebottle had taken first-aid classes and passed examinations at which most of the mockers would have boggled. The Bluebottles were civilians. There you have it. We, who would probably never do any battlefield soldiering in our lives, looked down on all civilians who had the impudence to wear a uniform of any sort. Such is the behavior of the sterner sex at a moment when its sole thought should be of sensible and efficient cooperation in the performance of duty. For of course it was our duty to cooperate with the Bluebottles. The theory with which we beguiled ourselves, that the Bluebottles were physically starvelings and required our Herculean aid to lift the stretchers up the stairs, was palpably nonsense. Still, we told ourselves that we, as disciplined soldiers, were here to give a hand to a civilian mob who might otherwise faint and fail. A singular delusion. Time has proved its falsity, for with the issue of our fresh orders, our station parties ceased to function. The Bluebottles now make shift without us, and without, as far as I know, any mishap. The hospital train was eventually signalled. We were ranked, at attention, at the foot of the stairs. The Bluebottles stood by their stretchers. There was hurrying hither and thither of officials. Sometimes our colonel, having motored from the hospital, appeared on the platform to see that all was well, and you may be sure that we endeavoured to look alert in his august presence. And finally the train glided into the station. The hospital trains seem to be never twice the same. Southwesterns, Northwesterns, Great Northerns, Midlands, Great Centrals, Lancashire, Yorkshires. I saw them all, at one time or another, their sole affinity being the staring red crosses painted on each coach. A coach or two consisted of ordinary compartments for sitting-up cases. The rest were vans, the interiors of which had been converted into wards by means of bunks. Access to each van ward was gained by a wide pair of sliding doors in its centre. These doors, when the train had come to a standstill, were opened by pallid-looking orderlies, who lowered gangways and then gazed forth at us, while they awaited orders, with the lack-lustre eyes of men who have been deprived of the proper allowance of sleep. As soon as the list of the medical officer on the train had been checked with that of the medical officer on the platform, the evacuation began. Walking cases were sent off first, generally a tatterdemalion crew, hobbling and shuffling along the platform, and at one stage of the war, with trench mud still clinging to their clothes. They seldom needed our assistance. The bluebottles, even if feeble folk, were deemed by our corporal to be fit to give any weak walking patient an arm or carry his kit. The walking patients, in fact, were a mere episode. Motor cars whirled them off, 5 or 6 at a time, and they might be half through the process of being bathed at the hospital before the last stretcher case was quit of the train. The stretcher cases were our concern. Pairs of bluebottles, each carrying a stretcher, entered the van wards and anon reappeared with their burden. Now came our cue to act. As the stretcher approached the foot of the stair, 2 of our number stepped forth from the rank, each taking a handle from a bluebottle. The stretcher thus proceeded on its course up the stair, carried by 4 men, 1 on each handle, 2 bluebottles, and 2 RAMCs. That flight of iron stairs from the platform to the road seemed no very arduous ordeal for the first half-dozen journeys. There was a knack about keeping the stretcher horizontal. The front bearers must hold their handles as low as possible, and the rear bearers must hoist their handles shoulder high. It was all plain sailing and perfectly easy. 4 men to a stretcher is luxurious. At least it is luxurious on the level, and if you have not got far to go and not many consecutive stretchers to carry. But when the convoy was a large one, when the bearers were too few, and you had no sooner got rid of one stretcher than you must run down the stairs and, without regaining your breath, grab the handle of another and slowly toil up again to the ambulances. Yes, even on the coldest day it was possible to be moist with perspiration. And as for the hot weather of the 1915 summer, when one of our big pushes was afoot, or when returned prisoners came from Germany, those were memorable occasions. You might be pardoned a certain aching in the arm muscles. It was one of these busy days that I discovered that the comical prejudice of khaki against the bluebottles was not, as I had hitherto supposed, confined to the young swashbucklers of the home-staying RAMC. It was seldom our custom to enter the hospital trains. An unwritten law decreed that bluebottles only should enter the train. The RAMC limited themselves to carrying work outside, on the platform and stair. But on this occasion the supply of bluebottles had, for the moment, run short, and our party took a turn at going up the gangways and evacuating the van wards. As it happened, I and my mate on the stretcher were the first khaki wearers to invade that particular van ward, and as we steered our stretcher in at the door and down the aisle of cots, a shout arose from the wounded lying there. "Here are the real soldiers!" It was too bad. It was base ingratitude to the devoted band of bluebottles who had, up till that instant, been toiling at the evacuation of the ward, and who, as I chanced to know, had been up all the previous night carrying stretchers at Paddington and Charing Cross while we slept cosily. But, well, there it was. Here are some real soldiers. Khaki greeted khaki, simultaneously spurning the mere amateur, the civilian. I could have blushed for the injustice of that naive cry. But it would be dishonest not to confess that there was something gratifying about it too. It was the cry of the army, always loyal to the army. These heroic bundles of bandages, lifting wild and unshaven faces from their pillows, hailed me, a wretched creature who had never heard a gun go off, as one of their comrades. My mate and I, as we adjusted our stretcher at a cot's side and braced ourselves against the weight of the patient, winked covertly at one another. "A nasty one for the bluebottles," he said, and it was. All the same, I seized this opportunity of offering my homage to the bluebottles. They have done, and are still doing, their bit, and that right nobly. Thousands of British soldiers have cause to bless them, and also to be thankful for the existence of that great voluntary institution, the London Ambulance Column. When at last the train had been emptied, and the ultimate stretcher was en route for the hospital, our party gathered once more at the top of the stairs, lined up, and was glanced over by the corporal, lest any man had seized the opportunity to play truant. There were occasions when some thirsty soul, chafing at the rigours of the strict teetotalism enforced by our rules, was found to have vanished into the hurly-burly, his destination the up-platform refreshment bar being readily surmisable. He had cause to regret his lapse if it were noticed, before he slipped back unostentatiously into our ranks. Then, "Party! Shun! Left turn! Right incline! Quick march!" Off we swung, out into the streets, cheered by the urchins who still hovered around the gate, and so, at the rapidest possible pace, home to dinner and a smoke, these, in my case at any rate, being preceded by the thankful relinquishment of my seldom worn and therefore none too friendly marching boots. End of chapter 13.